Now that we've learned some of the basic concepts of local area networks and routers and IP addressing, let's do a packet walk to bring it all together. So in order to simplify this a little bit, I've condensed our diagram down a little bit, and I've removed some of the components that we don't really need here. And we are going to do a packet walk from computer 1 to computer 3. So when computer 1 needs to send some kind of traffic to computer 3, it's going to send it to the destination IP address. So we'll start with the payload. This is whatever data needs to actually be sent. And in order to send the data, we've got to have a source IP address and a destination IP. And so here we can see that layer 3 addressing information. The source IP is 10.1.1.11. The destination IP is 10.1.2.13. So the operating system of computer 1 is going to have its own TCP/IP stack. The computer itself is going to know I'm part of the 10.1.1 network. I'm part of this segment. And if there is traffic that is destined for some other address range, like 10.1.2, that traffic needs to be sent to the default gateway. And so the computer says, okay, I know the address of my default gateway. I've got a default gateway on this local area network. And I know the MAC address of this interface on this router. Now we're just going to call that MAC address MAC R1. And so now the layer 2 addressing is going to be appended, and we're going to create an Ethernet frame. So the computer generates an Ethernet frame with the source MAC address being the MAC address of this computer, and the destination MAC address being the MAC address of the router interface that is connected to segment 1. And so that addressing is appended. And those addresses only matter within this segment, within segment 1. And so the computer transmits this frame out its network interface card, and the frame arrives at the physical switch. And the switch says, well, let me analyze the layer 2 addressing. The switch says, okay, I can see the source MAC, it's coming from MAC 1, and the destination MAC is MAC R1. Okay, perfect. I know how to get to MAC R1. It's in my MAC address table. Let me forward this Ethernet frame out of port 3. And the frame arrives at the router. The source and destination IP are never analyzed by a switch. A switch is a layer 2 device. And so it doesn't look at these layer 3 addresses. It only looks at the appropriate layer 2 addresses. Okay, so now our frame has been delivered to the router. And much like the switch, the router is going to begin to analyze these addresses. The first thing it's going to look at is the destination MAC. And it's going to say, oh, this is a destination MAC R1. This is me. It's kind of like getting an envelope in the mail with your name on it. This is addressed to me. Great. Well, what am I going to do? I'm going to rip open the envelope. And that's what the router does. It says, oh, this is addressed to me. Let me go ahead and look a little bit deeper. I'm going to remove the layer 2 headers at this point. And now the router is going to analyze the layer 3 headers. And the router is going to say, okay, well, the destination IP is 10.1.2.13. That's not this interface. That's not the address of the router. Right? We mentioned the address of the router over here is 10.1.1.1. Over here, it's 10.1.2.1. So the router looks in, and it's like seeing an envelope that doesn't have your name on it. It looks at these layer 3 headers, and it determines this is bound for the 10.1.2 network. And the router says, well, I've got an interface on that network. I've got an interface right here that's connected to that segment. Let me go ahead and forward this out into that segment. And so before the router can actually forward that out, it needs to append a new set of layer 2 headers because it's dumping this onto a new Ethernet network We need those MAC addresses. And so the router has looked at the destination IP. It knows the IP address that this traffic needs to end up at. And the router has an ARP table. And remember, the ARP table is there to associate IP addresses with MAC addresses. So the router has its own ARP table, and it knows that in order to get to 10.2.13, that traffic needs to be sent to MAC 3. And so that's what the router does. It says, okay, let me append some new Ethernet headers. Let me say that the source MAC is MAC R2. It is this interface here. And the destination MAC address is the MAC address from the ARP table. It's going to be MAC 3. It sends this frame out onto the segment, and the frame arrives at the physical switch. And the switch analyzes it, and it says, oh, here we see a frame. Let me look inside the frame. Let me look at the addresses. And it sees the destination MAC is MAC 3. And so it looks at its MAC address table, and it says, oh, MAC 3, I know about that. That is intended for port 2. Port 2 is where MAC 3 lives. And so it forwards the Ethernet frame out of port 2. And then at that point, the Ethernet frame arrives at the destination computer. And the destination computer says, okay, well, here comes a frame. Let me look at the addresses. MAC 3, that's me. I am the destination MAC. Again, it's like getting an envelope with your name on it. And when you get this envelope with your name on it, you open it up, right? So the receiving computer says, let me go ahead and remove these layer 2 headers. And let's look deeper. Let's look at layer 3. And it sees, oh, the destination IP is 10.1.213. That's me. Again, like getting an envelope with your name on it. And so the computer says, this one's for me. Let me open it up. Let me look a little bit deeper. And then it finds the payload. And there's some layer 4 information as well that we don't really talk about, TCP and UDP ports that we're not going to get into just now. But yeah, now it's got the payload, and so it can be delivered to whatever application that requires it. Maybe we're doing a file transfer and we've got some FTP application, or maybe we're sending an email and this goes into the email application. Whatever the case may be, at that point, the payload is successfully delivered. And so that's just a look at how data gets from one computer to another using layer 3 IP packets and layer 2 Ethernet frames, and all of the addressing that goes into that transmission of data. Okay, so let's take a moment to do a brief review of what we just learned. We just learned that layer 2 addresses are local to their Ethernet segment. So as traffic hits a router, those source and destination MAC addresses are discarded, and new source and destination MAC addresses are utilized on the destination segment. We learned that switches forward traffic based on source and destination MAC addresses within our local layer 2 Ethernet segment versus routers, which make forwarding decisions based on layer 3 IP addresses.